Go. Lots of people in the room. Thank you all for joining us. I hope you've all been checking out social media and joining in. Watching our films and and some of our listening to our podcasts.
How's the week been, Sarah?
It's been good. It's been busy. Jen and I have learned a lot.
Not just about tourism.
And it's been really lovely hearing about all the different things that are going on across Scotland. There's so much going on, which is just incredible. So for those of you that are just joining, we are just waiting on the Minister and then we will get cracking. I feel like maybe the Senscott team should be singing a song now.
Oh, wait.
Pauline, I feel that you should lead in the sing song.
Sarah, you should be proud. I've been tweeting all week.
I'm very proud. What was that? Sorry, Kim?
I've just admitted the Minister.
Ah, lovely.
Yeah.
I think the Minister may have quite a poor connection.
Good afternoon, I'm here. I've just managed to get this working from the back of a car. Apologies for being late. I was actually out in Luss, and the tourism industry is booming to such an extent that there's traffic jams everywhere. So, I'm assuming that's the reason. Anyway, great to be here, and apologies for being late.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. That's no problem at all. We will get started then. So hello everyone and welcome to our afternoon session, which comes at the end of our very busy week celebrating community tourism in Scotland. Just before we begin, actually, I just want to mention that this session is being recorded, and that is because it will go out on social media when we probably later today, if Jen and I can edit it and get it out. And also that the usual rules apply. So as we've obviously just demonstrated, we're all pros at this now, but so if you can please keep yourself muted unless you're speaking. And please feel free to use that chat function as well for further discussion. And Jen is here in the background. Do you want to give a wave, Jen? She's there in the background, so if you've got any problems at all, just message Jen or drop her an email and she'll be able to help. I'd like to start by welcoming Ivan McKee, Minister for Business, Trade, Tourism, Enterprise, from the back of a car en route from Loch Lomond. Welcome, Minister. It's lovely to have you here.
Yeah, great to be all. Thank you.
And I'd also like to introduce Artemis Panna from Scottish Rural Action. So Artemis and her team also head up the Scottish Rural Parliament and have been a great supporter of these discussions. So this is quite a short session with a lot to fit in, so I'm going to move on quite quickly. I'm going to give you some background. I'll then pass over to Artemis, who will talk about the recommendations that came out of the Scottish Rural Parliament session that we ran in March. And then we'll invite the Minister for a response and any reflections before opening up for a broader discussion. I believe the Minister needs to leave at around 3:15, but we're all happy to stay on and continue discussions if folk are interested in doing that. So to kick off, after a community learning exchange a few years ago to Dornoch Kick, I don't know if folk have been to Dornoch, but it's well worth a visit. But after that visit, Senscott really started to develop the work that we were doing around community-led tourism. We started to explore the challenges communities were facing, and more communities and community organisations started to get in touch. So we kind of made a shift into the policy landscape and really started to connect with discussions around future opportunities, eventually meeting with some of our national partners, including the Scottish Government Tourism Division, I would add, and that really took conversations to the next level. The new tourism strategy obviously puts community at the heart, but beyond the focus on place, where it kind of sits within the strategy, communities play a part in all the other areas, particularly employability and economic development. And during the tourism strategy consultation phase, we were connecting with a huge variety of organisations. We took part in lots of different events that were happening. And there was a real desire for a more active and representative role for community at a national level. And that wasn't just coming from the community sector. I spoke to private sector, public sector leaders who were hugely supportive of a shift in the decision-making process to allow communities to have a voice. And they were proactively engaging in conversations around this topic. So in October last year, we embarked on a proof of concept project. And this project has been delivered in partnership with Creetown Initiatives, with the communities of Girvan in South Ayrshire and Brechin and Angus, where I now know you're all going to go on your holidays. We're providing support and resource to enable these two communities to start to explore how they can take ownership over their tourism offer and really start to develop it for the benefit of the wider community. And I guess that brings me to what we see as community-led tourism. And I would say that we very much see it as communities being empowered to develop their own offer, take a leadership role. And during the Rural Parliament session, we used what is good for communities is good for tourism. And to me, this seems like common sense, but I think that we can go a step further and say that tourism really only happens with the permission of communities, and therefore isn't it time that they had a voice? So our proof of concept project, as a mouthful, will come to an end in around a year. And from that, we'll be able to share our learning, not just with communities across Scotland, but also with the national agencies and the private sector, because at the moment, that's really where the power lies. And I really feel that we're part of a movement here at the moment. There's a shift away from traditional tourism to a more sustainable tourism. And when I say sustainable, I mean environmentally, socially and economically. And I'd like to add that during our discussions with partners, it became clear that there's a variety of work happening across Scotland to provide support to community-led initiatives. So we're not the only ones. It's been happening for a long time. But the lack of communication around these pieces of work highlights the need for a strategic policy-led approach. And I think we would all agree that the COVID pandemic has made last year really hard for the tourism industry. But I also think that we're struck by how communities have come together to support one another. And for me, this has really highlighted how nimble communities can be, the skills that exist within them, and actually what I see at the moment is real optimism going forward. At Scott and with some of our other partners, I know that we've had an increase in new startup social enterprises. We know that some people have had a chance to reevaluate and choose a different future. And I think social enterprise has a role in developing opportunities locally. They're already acting as anchor organisations, and they could be providing support to community groups. But this work that they're doing is often an extra workload with costs absorbed by already stretched organisations. So I think there's some work to be done around building capacity within these organisations so that they're better placed to react to opportunities. So I think that our next steps are about making sure that the route is made easier for communities, that there is access to the right resources at the right time, that there is knowledge and understanding at a national and local level about how to support and empower, and most importantly, that communities are recognised as an equal as well and have a place at the table when the planning decisions are being made both locally and nationally. We saw during COVID, we saw the tourism industry really step up during the crisis. The emergency response group was obviously created, an action plan recovery was developed, support was given where it's most needed. And I guess that we want to make sure communities are part of those decisions in the future. As I mentioned, communities obviously at the heart of the new tourism strategy. And I'm just really keen that we're not just paying lip service, that actually community remains at the heart and we move away from that top-down approach. I'm going to hand straight over to Artemis now for more on what came out of the Rural Parliament session and some of those asks that came from those discussions.
Thank you very much, Sarah. And a lot of what I'm going to say reinforces your introductory words. For those of you who've not heard of the Scottish Rural Parliament, it's a non-political democratic assembly. It takes place every 2 years and brings communities, businesses policymakers together to debate priorities for rural and island development. The topics we debate at the Scottish Rural Parliament are set through a process of consultation that spans several months. So last year we conducted 2 national level surveys and a series of regional meetings, 16 in total from Shetland all the way down to the Scottish borders. About 1,000 people participated in shaping the Scottish Rural Parliament programme, and a further 500, or actually more than 500, took part in the main event in March 2021. Tourism was almost this golden thread that wound its way through the Scottish Rural Parliament debates. It had its own session. It's a topic where I suppose multiple different priorities play out, you know, people's livelihoods, culture, infrastructure, young people's ability to stay in rural areas, that debate about rural places as being places to live and work or places to visit and have a holiday in. And these priorities, when they play out, they can do so in a very kind of polarized way. For example, you know, we use the term diversifying the economy. We use that term a lot. And when we do, diversifying tends to mean moving away from over-dependence on tourism. And obviously over-dependence is not desirable, but the way the diversification debate plays out can really obscure the ability of tourism itself to diversify to more sustainable, slow and responsible models. And it also obscures the fact that many communities have struggled to attract tourists and would love to do more. A second very polarized debate that emerged at the Scottish Rural Parliament is around the impact of tourism on communities, on infrastructure, on housing, on the job market, on litter and the retention of young people. And these are very real and very urgent concerns. So we get into a situation where the focus becomes reassuring or placating communities and trying to alleviate concerns. And in the process, the other side of the debate, which is what Sarah was talking about, communities' impact on tourism gets obscured. And that is, as Sarah said, the creation of very vibrant areas and visitor offerings that really do benefit communities and that tourists themselves want to experience. So we do need to shift that narrative away from one where communities are presented as just having concerns that need to be alleviated to one where communities are presented as having solutions to concerns that are resourced and they're resourced to enact them, and not just solutions, but ideas about how to develop and encourage tourism. So as Sarah said, community-led tourism, and I would add by community-led tourism, we also mean community business-led, because a lot of the driving force behind this agenda are small and micro enterprises in the private sector alongside community-owned and social enterprises. So the recommendations coming out of the Scottish Rural Parliament based on all these debates point to the need for community-led tourism to have equal influence at strategic level to other tourism industry interests. And you know, that means on government groups and also within tourism bodies such as Visit Scotland. The Scottish Rural Parliament delegates, and I think many are here today, so do in the comments, please keep me right and do add your thoughts to all this. But they called for a better networked community-led tourism sector with increased investment in both peer support and the development of a collective leadership, so that voice that Sarah was talking about, which can be channeled to the strategic level. And on the back of the Scottish Rural Parliament, this investment is something that the Scottish Government is actively considering, which is very positive. The important thing, though, is that also at strategic level, there needs to be investment to engage. So that one of the Scottish Rural Parliament recommendations was for dedicated community-led tourism leads within industry bodies, including Visit Scotland, that can fully focus on this agenda. And that's about creating the space and bridges for co-production of strategy. Similarly, space is needed at a more local level. So destination management organizations, for example, do fantastic jobs, but like all of us, they do these jobs on very, very finite resources. And we would like to see additional resources piloted in destination management organizations or similar organizations to build their capacity to fully engage with community-led tourism. The pilot element is quite important because a national one-size-fits-all approach is not going to work in all communities. So underpinning, though, this bridge building and co-production of strategy, there really does need to be a new framework for measuring tourism impacts, you know, moving beyond visitor numbers, job numbers, contribution to GDP, to examining the types of jobs that tourism creates, and tourism's contribution to community well-being, to community wealth building, and to important aspects like enabling young people to live there in rural areas year-round. The remaining recommendations, because I realise I'm running out of time here, Sarah's going to keep me right, very much focused on a need for more investment, and that investment needs to be tailored to communities. So investment in marketing, and we would like to see substantial budget to support communities to market themselves in Scotland's Year of Stories, investment in infrastructure, including through increasing the Rural Tourism Infrastructure Fund, and investment in innovation and enterprise, so community-led approaches to slow and sustainable tourism. I think what is incredibly positive, and I'd like to thank the Minister for being here today, is that this discussion, though at an early stage, is already picking up momentum. And the take-home message really is that culture change, or that change in narrative that we're trying to achieve, it will take time, but if we pave the way with some targeted investment in the right places, that momentum will continue to grow, and with it, the benefits obviously for communities, for the wider industry, and of course for tourists themselves. Thank you.
Brilliant, thank you, Artemis. I would like to hand over to Minister now for any thoughts and reflections on all of that.
Yeah, thanks very much, and thanks for the invite here this afternoon. It's been really interesting, and I think it picks up on a whole range of different strands, and it's kind of difficult to know where to start with it. So first of all, clearly the tourism sector, and I'm new to the sector, having taken up responsibility a few weeks ago, so I'm still getting up to speed on a lot of aspects, but clearly the sector's in a difficult place as a consequence of the pandemic, and there's a lot of conversations about how we move out of the current levels of restrictions and get back to a place where the sector is able to function as it was. So clearly that's taken up a lot of the focus, as it rightly should. But I'm also very keen, and I've had conversations with sector bodies, that it's important we've got a strategic framework for moving forward. We understand where we want to be medium and long term as we come out of this. And the sector's focus on that, I think, is great. The strategy that's in place, the work that's happening there, I think, is really valuable to allow us to do that. Clearly, as part of that, the net zero drive is of great importance, and what that means in terms of the shift in focus and the types of tourism that make sense in that context, I think is obviously an overarching kind of backdrop, if you like, to this to the strategic direction. And finally, the way the sector is going to go, because of the shift in terms of what tourists are looking for in terms of that experience, in the context of sustainability, net zero, and the type of experience that will be expected, I think is a shift not just here but globally, that we'll continue to see. So I think community-based tourism has the opportunity to fit into that overarching direction and be able to contribute with great value there. The themes round about that they're also central to the Scottish Government's economic strategic direction going forward, and about fair work, I think also plays in, because you're talking about, and you've mentioned it already, the ability of tourism in our community to be able to focus on the value to local businesses and to employment opportunities, and not just numbers of employment, but the value, the type of that employment and the value of it to the individual in the community. I think it's also got some really interesting touch points into the broader economic strategic direction that the Scottish Government is very focused on around about fair work. So I think there's huge value there. And then, of course, there's the whole concept around about community wealth building, and so on, that my colleague Tom Arthur is taking forward from a ministerial point of view, that again has got some real areas of overlap here that are hugely valuable. So I think there's a lot of different aspects of this that where it kind of it ticks boxes, but there's a lot more than that, because it's central to a lot of the themes that the government is keen on developing. So to some extent, there's a lot of open doors there, if you like, that we can kind of work through with this model. The issues round about how this relates with the overarching tourism work through Visit Scotland, again, something you've kind of touched on in the briefing has been mentioned. It's important that that's got its place within that overall context. Now, exactly how we determine where that sits, I've got to get myself up to speed and understand a bit more about the overall strategic direction and the role that community-led tourism can play. But I've got to believe there's going to be a lot of value there that it can bring. An assessment of the scope and scale will be interesting, and I think as you work through that, it's going to be valuable to understand what it can contribute to the tourism sector in general, but also very much to local communities, because there's two ways of looking at this. It's what it can add to the value of tourism in Scotland in that sector, and obviously it's a big sector, a lot of different parts to it, and it may be that the numbers here are going to be on the small side, certainly initially, compared to the overall tourism sector. But I think two things there: the potential for growth is potentially significant, particularly on the back of sustainable tourism, but also the disproportionate impact economically it will have on individual communities is something that needs to be factored in as well, and that understanding. So I think that's really important to consider. And then finally, the approach you're taking round about the pilots, I think is valuable, because that allows you to get to a place where you get something to point to that says this is what it can deliver when we drive forward that agenda in particular communities. And as you've rightly said, it's not just about traditional community groups, if you like, it's the community in the widest sense, so community businesses, etc., etc. Girvan, I kind of know because my grandmother used to live in Girvan and ran a cafe there, so I spent many a happy day wandering along the shore there, so I kind of know what's there. I suppose it's then what is the attractor? How do you persuade people that it's worth going to Girvan or Brecon or elsewhere? And is that, do you envisage that being in isolation, or is there a lot of value attached to being able to plug that into wider thematic tourism, be that at the NC 500, we've got other initiatives like that coming up in South Ayrshire. You've clearly got a Burns aspect to this. So wherever you go, there's other touchstones there. Is it important that they're kind of hooked into that as part of the attractor, or is that something that's central, or does the community-led initiative able to function kind of in the absence of that? So that's my initial kind of thoughts. Very broad ranging. It is very interesting, and I know it's relatively early days, so I'm really keen to hear the rest of this conversation, but also to see where it goes as we move forward. I've now arrived at my destination, so I'm going to turn my video off. I shall continue to listen, and then I'll turn my video back on when I'm settled in at my desk. Okay, so back over to you. Thank you very much.
Brilliant, thank you very much. That was really interesting, and I was really interested to hear that you'd mentioned community wealth building as well, because I think that that's probably an area that we're hugely interested in, and there's potential moving forward. I'm interested to know what people kind of think about that strategic direction, and maybe just while the Minister is kind of resettling at a desk, we could maybe open up a little bit and have a conversation. If anybody has any thoughts around that strategic direction, I think that one thing that's become very clear to me going forward is that voice. How do we create that equal voice at a national level? I don't think anybody has a perfect answer to this, but I would be interested on people's thoughts on what is needed and how we take that forward. I'm keen to see a shift away from a top-down approach from that. Does there now? Oh, we've got Alison Elliott's got her hand up. Alison, do you want to come in?
Yeah, I think my name is Alison Elliott. I'm the chair of the Angus Tourism Cooperative. I have a manager of a social enterprise in Angus, and we've been involved in developing community-led tourism in Angus for some time. I was also part of a European leader-funded project looking at this across 3 countries in Europe. So I'm very passionate about this subject, and in Angus, we don't pretend that we have it perfect, but I think in regards to the strategy and frameworks that we're all working to, we're delighted in Angus that we're now in our second year of our framework, and it is very much community based. And it was good to hear Artemis say that it's not just community led tourism, it is business community too. So within all of our themes across our framework, we have individuals, community groups and businesses working together to deliver that strategy for Angus. And I think in regards to a more national and high level strategy for tourism, community led, if that's really the focus it can have, I think we need to also have the flexibility that it is very localised, because of the challenges we face in rural Angus and even within the towns in Angus is very different to Edinburgh or Glasgow or the West Coast. So I think that really local level focus for each community will be different, and I think that can't be lost in the discussion.
You're on mute, Sarah.
Rookie mistake there. I was just saying that I'd be interested to know what your thoughts are on how that fits in with the DMO, the Destination Management Organisation landscape.
Yeah, and again, it's interesting because it's so different in every area. So in Angus, we have Visit Angus, which is the marketing brand, which is held by the local authority. But we now also have the Angus Tourism Cooperative. We are there to represent the organisations, community groups and businesses. But we're very clear that everything that we do, we try now and are succeeding, I would say, in doing that together. All the work that we're doing is in partnership with each other. And although perhaps not everyone is in the same place at the moment, I think we can see where we want to go, and we need to encourage others to join in that conversation. And like I say, it is very particular to each area or local authority and how the DMOs work in those areas. But I think in Angus we have a really good model that we're working with. It may change over time. We may find that something doesn't work and something has to change. But where we are now, we are really trying to make the most of it and to move ahead with that.
Yeah, absolutely. Artemis, do you have any thoughts on what came out of the Rural Parliament session around that voice and how to kind of take that strategic approach forward? Just to put you on the spot.
No, I was just very interested in what Alison was saying, and that definitely chimes with a lot of the feedback from the Scottish Rural Parliament. I think at a strategic level, what needs to happen at the very outset is that we do need a statement or some reaffirmation of this agenda, which the Minister has already given us today and for which I personally am very grateful for. So reaffirming really the Scottish Government commitment to this agenda as part of the national effort to ensure tourism's revival and continued sustainability and growth. So we do go on a lot about bottom-up approaches because that is the correct way to engage with communities, but really this leadership and the capacity at the top also needs to be acknowledged and resourced. So I think really in concrete terms, what we need to be doing is looking at the interfaces between community-led tourism and decision-making, and where those interfaces are weak, and address that weakness through capacity building. So for example, the interface between Visit Scotland and communities is not that strong. We suggest that perhaps additional specific and targeted resource within Visit Scotland may make a difference. The interface between Scottish Tourism Alliance and communities is also not that strong. And this is not criticising Visit Scotland or the Scottish Tourism Alliance, it's acknowledging capacity issues. With Scottish Tourism Alliance, partly you have to pay to be a member of the Alliance. So, the minimum membership is £220, and that's going to be quite limiting if you're a micro business. So maybe that interface can be looked at in the context of membership. There are multiple options here, and at government level, on the strategic groups that have done a fantastic job, in terms of tourism recovery, in terms of tourism planning, there is absolutely no voice there from the community sector, and that means that there are missed opportunities, because when you look at the contribution of communities to Scotland's tourism infrastructure, to Scotland's tourism planning, there's a huge amount there that's not being captured and maximised think that's how you have to look at it. It's where do you have opportunities to influence, and how do you build those bridges?
Yeah, absolutely. Minister, please feel free to jump in at any time if you have any thoughts around any of this. Does anybody else have any thoughts around that kind of strategic level and what's happening in their own particular areas? It's difficult for me to see anybody, so you might need to put up your virtual hand as opposed to wave at me. Oh, we've got Joan from Dornoch. So Dornoch is where obviously that kicks it all off. So our meetings with Joan where a lot of our work came from.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. We're very lucky, I think, in Dornoch, well, for lots of reasons, but in particular because we had a Dornoch Economic Master Plan that was set in place by Highlands and Islands Enterprise in 2013. And that's a 10-year plan. Obviously, we're coming towards the end of that. But that has let us take the initiative as a community, but working with the businesses and community groups to deliver quite a lot of benefits, improved signage, new visitor centre, staff in the visitor centre, leaflets, website, app, all these sorts of things. But the other advantage of that High was involved is that we have a Dornoch focus group, which is all the stakeholders looking once a quarter to see how we're doing in terms of that plan. And Visit Scotland has got a voice on there, or we have a voice, an ear on our focus group to Visit Scotland, which has been really helpful to us. So, and I don't know how easy that is to manage in other places, but it has been really helpful for us. So just a suggestion.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that what we've learned from the pilot is that it's a bit of a postcode lottery. So for those communities that have a relationship with those national partners, so whether it be High or Scottish Enterprise or Visit Scotland or whoever, they are better placed to be able to take projects forward, whereas communities that are maybe sitting under the radar don't really have that opportunity to bid in and be able to work with somebody and pull in some resource and support to make things happen. So I guess that part of this conversation is we would like to see that evened out a little bit so that there's more opportunity for those communities, that are sitting under the radar. Which kind of brings, so we've got another couple of hands up. Jason, do you want to come in?
Hi there.
Hi.
Is it working?
Yes, it's working.
Right, okay. No, as some might know, that we started up keeping it local in Campbelltown about 4 or 5 years ago. 4 years ago. And we added, which came a bit later, but once Visit Scotland pulled out of Campbelltown and Tarbert and a few other areas down this way, we added it to what we do. Initially it was promoting business, trades and services, but now we've added the tourism thing, because we felt it was a big loss to the area. Now we ended up being a what do you call it, a kind of I know centre, and then been trying to kind of liaise with them on even the DMOs, and like pretty much I think it's near Mid-Argyll, that's all paid, everything's paid, and we've got to be in touch with them, which is like, the Argyll Niles Tourism Cooperative. So I had to go through them to try and get any funding from Visit Scotland. Do you get me?
Yeah.
So to get in locally, we weren't getting in unless we engaged with the AITC. But they don't really get in touch with us. They're not working together, if you get where I'm coming from. So we've not been able to access anything. Visit Scotland, after becoming an I know centre, like here, giving out information, we're doing it all on our own accord, with no support from them. That was the last we heard of them once they sent out some stickers to say we were an IMO centre. Yeah. And that was it. There's no more community stuff. Yeah, so I think that probably leads into a bigger conversation actually about the role of Visit Scotland, because that's obviously shifted and changed over the years. So I think that probably leads into a whole other conversation there. But certainly I think that there is an issue around making those connections and making sure that communities
are able to tap into that resource and support, and that Visit Scotland have the resources as well. Sorry, Jason, I'm just going to mute. Lovely, thank you. Yeah, so I think that there is something around Visit Scotland having the capacity to be able to connect with communities in that way, and also, potentially is there other resource and capacity requirements so that we can ensure that communities like yourselves, especially communities in rural areas that are far away, Campbelltown's not the closest, so how can we make sure those links are made going forward? Which kind of actually brings us to a question around the around resource, I guess, and investment. So the Year of Scotland Stories obviously is coming up, and we kind of have this issue around how can communities get involved in the focus years? How can they step up? There's a lot of competition when it comes to the focus years, that level of marketing. And how can we ensure that the destinations that are maybe not the usual go-to areas have an opportunity to tap into that and tell their own stories and bring visitors in? And that also those communities, again, some of those rural areas that maybe they're already suffering from over-tourism, and how can they manage that so that the stories aren't even bringing even more people in, if you think about the outlander effect and what have you. So I'd be interested to know, I don't know if the Minister has an idea of what's happening with funding around the Year of Scotland Stories, and also if there's opportunity to be doing bespoke pieces of work with communities going forward.
Well, specifically on that, I don't want to talk on it just now. I'm meeting again with Visit Scotland, I think, next week, and I'm going to be talking through some of this stuff in more detail. So what I can do is, through my conversation with them, make sure that they're engaged with yourselves to make you aware of that landscape and what it looks like. But yeah, with Scotland's Year of Stories coming up, it's, as you said, thinking through how communities are able to plug into that narrative, I think, is important, and build up that much broader tapestry, if you like, of what's out there, because there is a danger, as you said, that it ends up getting targeted very much at the more high profile locations. So I think that's absolutely true. The issue around about visitor management, again, clearly is multifaceted to that. Want to encourage tourism, want to encourage it in a sustainable way, but the capacity needs to be in place to cope with that. And if you get these surges where you can overrun that capacity, you clearly get challenges around about visitor management. It's something that's been a hot topic recently because of various kind of incidences of people have obviously gone back out and started visiting locally. It's something I'm engaged in watching, and certainly Kate Forbes, my boss, if you like, has been very engaged in it because of her local constituency concerns around about it. So it's something that's absolutely on the radar. But I think you go back to your original point. I think you're absolutely right. Connecting this up with Visit Scotland, understanding that umbrella of funding and what that looks like, and understanding how much of that gets is able to be directed to community-led initiatives within that context of Scotland's Year of Stories is important. And I'll make a point of having that conversation with them next week.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that it's a tremendous opportunity actually to drive some of this forward and to really connect to more communities going forward as well. I think that we have a question from Pauline. Pauline, do you want to come in and ask your question? If you're there.
Yes, I am here.
You're there.
I wanted to. Sorry, I was kicked out for a while. Somebody may have asked this question, but I just wanted to make a kind of observation to the Minister on if he agrees that community-led tourism has the added benefits of encouraging and building local supply chains across the social sector with the private sector. And I know that's something you've done a lot of good work on, Ivan, throughout the pandemic in terms of a Scottish manufacturing base. So at a community level around tourism, I would see a real added value in building supply chains then there.
That's a great point, and to be honest, I'm glad you raised it, because yeah, we're doing a lot of work on supply chains. A lot of that's at more of a kind of Scotland-wide level, and we're looking at various sectors and products where we want to build up capacity in Scotland to be able to deal with all kinds of challenges. But at a local level, the importance of those local supply chains to community-led tourism, I think, is invaluable, and that absolutely should be a real key focus there, and that can have tremendous spillover benefits right across pretty much everything, because it's not just the cafes and bars and restaurants and hotels and the visit attractions, but it's all the services that support them, which is pretty much everybody in a community, all the trades that and the various other supply chain and agriculture and everything can be involved in that. And agri-tourism, of course, is something we're working on, pulling a strategy together which will play very much into this space across many communities. So you're absolutely right. It's something that should be highlighted as you pull together the work on the benefits of this approach.
Lovely, thank you. I'm aware of the time. I'm not sure if you have to head away, Minister, if you've got
another 5 minutes or so. That's
another
okay.
5 minutes or so. Does anybody else have any questions or thoughts? We have another question in the chat from Ewan McLaughlin. Do you want to come in?
Okay, I've typed it, I'll say it. Could the Minister possibly suggest that Visit Scotland shift their budget priorities during the pandemic and focus more of their budget on the chronically underfunded tourism infrastructure rather than promoting Scotland as a destination at a time when people cannot travel, and inward travel to Scotland doesn't look very likely over the next year or so? There's a huge disparity in VS budget. I think it's 60 million spent on marketing, 12 million on infrastructure. There needs to be a rebalancing of that at some point, particularly I'm up in Ascent in the Northwest Highlands, and we are suffering at the moment.
Thanks for raising that. I'm not going to pretend I'm on top of those numbers yet, only been in the post a short time, and as I said, I've got an upcoming meeting with Visit Scotland to go through a few issues. That is something I can raise with them and have that conversation. I absolutely see your point. I mean, clearly there is an importance on marketing to attract and promote Scotland internationally. That's obviously hugely important. But the point you make about where we're at this particular point in time is well made, and I shall have that discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think what's really been highlighted today for me here is how broad the conversation is. We're really covering a multitude of different subjects, and it would be really useful, I think, to be able to continue to have these conversations. And I certainly feel that you know, at Scott, we're all about communication, we're all about networking, providing that opportunity for people to come together. And although our focus is always social enterprise, the community, you know, as Artemis pointed out, the community-led tourism is more than just the community sector. It includes everybody, really. We're keen to make sure that conversation continues, and so we'd be really keen to continue to do this, maybe come together again as another group, and the door is open, Minister, you know, to continue these conversations with yourself as well, and make sure that communities really do start to have a voice, as we've obviously discussed, how we make sure that voice happens at a national level when it comes to planning is something that has to be kind of decided upon and worked upon. But I think that in the meantime, we're happy to provide that opportunity to keep coming back and connecting with communities as well. Does anybody else have any other questions before the Minister has to leave? Artemis, do you want to come in with any thoughts on what people have said, what we've spoken about, or any other thoughts?
I think just to add a new dimension to the whole community-led tourism debate, and just to highlight that in many situations, community-led tourism is about the community of place, but in other situations, it's also about communities of interest. And in discussing community-led tourism, it's important, I suppose, to bear in mind that different communities, including our Gaelic speakers, including our travellers, including our New Scots and our LGBTQ communities, all have an important contribution to make towards the tourism agenda in Scotland.
Yeah, and that's an interesting point, actually. I think the Social Enterprise Academy are about to embark on a project with Gaelic speakers and Gaelic speakers in Ireland around tourism, a leadership project. So that's kind of following on from the work that they were doing with High and SOSI around leadership and community-led tourism. So that'll be really interesting. They've not embarked on that yet, but I think it'll be really interesting to see what comes out of that, because I think you're absolutely right, Artemis. I think there's opportunity around some of these other areas as well. Does anybody else have any other questions? Oh, we've got Ranald Rickson. Hi, Ranald. You want to come in? Can you get your microphone to work?
Hi, apologies. Hi, I suppose it was just kind of touching on a couple of points that have been raised previously about creating that voice at a kind of national level. And, you know, there's a wider conversation to be had, I think, certainly in terms of, you know, the kind of role of Visit Scotland and SDA and other institutions. I suppose I was kind of curious, you know, Ivan's perspective, what his thoughts were in the kind of current diversity and representation within some of our national institutions. And I think this is you know, it's a tricky one. I mean, we're quite centralised as a country, you know, in terms of some of our national organisations, and you probably wouldn't have something like, you know, 11-12 billion pound sector, a £3 million per annum rural tourism infrastructure fund, if you like, if we were a wee bit more diverse and representative. So I think it's, you know, we certainly need to change things kind of going forward.
Thank you. Do you want to come in, Minister?
Yeah, I'll pick up on that and say apologies, but I need to leave it as well. But yeah, I think Randall, you're talking about the geographical focus is effectively what you're talking about.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. No, again, I mean, I'm early to it, but which is good because it means it's really valuable for me to hear these perspectives and take these into my conversations with Visit Scotland and others about how these issues are addressed. But I absolutely get your point, because I mean, tourism by its nature is it should be diverse. It should be it's spread across all parts of the country, and it's of disproportionate impact and benefit to the more rural and less central parts of the country, if you like. Absolutely. So it's a point well made, and it's something I shall again be putting on my radar to follow up with them. And I'd just like to say in general, thanks very much for the session. It's been really interesting to see what's going on in this space. It helps get it on my radar into my thinking around about the sector and help those conversations. Very keen to stay engaged and see those pilots as they unfold, and to see the articulation of the benefits, if you like, in those local communities, economic and wider benefits as well would be really interesting and helpful. So thanks again, and I've no doubt I'll see you again.
Thank you very much. Yes, thank you very much for joining us. And
Thanks.
The door is open, so yeah, absolutely. Let's continue the conversation. Thank you. Enjoy the sunshine now. The sun just seems to have come out. Folks, we're going to stay online. If anybody else wants to stay and have a little chat, we will stay on for another maybe another 10 minutes or so. If anybody else, does anybody else have any thoughts on what has been discussed today? They've all gone very quiet now. I haven't had a chance to look at the chat, so I'm just going to have a wee look now. Does anybody have any thoughts about the asks that went out through the Parliament that Artemis kind of ran through there? Does anyone have any thoughts? Do they resonate with people? Get thumbs up, maybe, if people don't want to say anything. Use your little virtual thumbs up. Does it give you a thumbs up? It does. Look at that. Yeah. So do they resonate with folk, or do people feel that that is what they're thinking? Is there any major gaps in there that we're missing out? We've got some. You've all gone very quiet now. Okay, Vanessa, so you're asking where do we stand on tourism tax? Do you want to come in and do you want to say more about that, Vanessa?
Well, it's really because here in the Highlands, you know, we've got the North Coast 500, which there are many views about. But what's become incredibly obvious in the work that we are doing up here, I work with the Black Isle Partnership, and the Black Isle Partnership, you know, is constantly every week coming up with issues created by tourism. We've got roads that are in a truly terrible condition and can't take the burden of all the camper vans and things. And it's always seemed obvious that what we need is a tourism tax to help fund this huge gap, you know, in the impact that tourists have on our infrastructure and the council's ability or inability to pay for that. It's always been controversial, yet almost every other country has a tourist tax and you never notice it when you go there. So I don't know where we stand in that debate at the moment. I know there was something in the Scottish Government going on before the election and something was due to be rediscussed after the election. Should have asked the Minister about that actually. But, you know, there has to be money to pay for this infrastructure, which is, you know, causing so much anguish to so many people at the moment in the Highlands.
Yeah. Does anybody have an update on that? Artemis, do you know anything about the tourism tax? Have you had any updates?
I might be wrong here, but I think what happened is Highland Council anyway passed a motion where they agreed to the tourism tax in terms of, you know, that's a direction that they were going to take as a local authority. And that was just pre-pandemic. So I just wonder, in terms of the national position on it, whether a lot of the conversation has stalled because the emphasis quite rightly now is on you know, supporting the tourism industry to recover.
Yeah, I think
I could be wrong on that.
Certainly it was very loud, wasn't it, pre-pandemic? There was a lot of conversation going on, and then it kind of disappeared. So I'm afraid I don't know where it's at the moment, but I suspect that it won't go away, that the conversation will come back, and it's maybe something that we could ask for more information on. We could certainly ask. Kirsty, you're saying you think it was left to each local authority to decide? Potentially. I don't think we have an answer today, but we can certainly go away and I can find out, and we can feed back to people if we get an answer to that.
That would be great, thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions or thoughts?
Hi, Ranald.
Hi, yes. Sorry, I just thought possibly just one more, and it's just because there are lots of good stuff on there, if you like. Probably just kind of somewhat kind of data related, if you like, and one of the things I think would be really good for us is, you know, the openness and accessibility of some of that data, and looking at our understanding of tourism related kind of public expenditure across Scotland. You know, and I think that's really an important thing to get a handle on. Community wealth building also kind of been touched on. It's clearly really important. But yeah, I mean, I think even when you're looking at R&D expenditure, obviously this is wider, broader than just kind of tourism, but the intensity maps, UK government can publish something in terms of UK government funding, and you look at the high intensity, low intensity areas across the UK, and it's quite clear a lot of rural parts of Scotland are, you know, in low intensity areas. So, you know, I think it's something that sometimes you ask questions and you want some of that data to be more open and available, but it's sometimes very challenging to get that. So I think in terms of tourism, open data strategies within kind of tourism, whether it be community led and otherwise. You know, there's a lot of work to be done in that space.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, thank you. This is all really interesting, and I'm certainly going to take away some. You know, I'll write a report up on this session and certainly feed back to government with some questions, and look for some more information from them as well.
And certainly, with Ranald's point, the Scottish Government's major kind of research programme on rural agriculture, where tourism used to sit, actually, it doesn't anymore, I've just remembered. But that goes through a 5-year cycle, a very, very well-funded 5-year cycle. And the next 5-year cycle begins next year. So this would be a very good time to start asking for the type of metrics that you're talking about, that we need to really capture, you know, tourism's impact, but also the contribution of community-led tourism, and all of that. It certainly it will be heard now more than at any other time.
And there are a couple of things going on as well in terms of Tourism Data Observatory, data hub as well. But you know, there are still things to be done in terms of coordination around that, and whose voices are kind of present within some of those things, and where some of that money is spent as well in terms of, again, R&D. So
yeah, absolutely. So I've got a comment from Vesna around cooperating and learning exchange experiences with other countries. Vesna, a good person to speak to would be Alison Elliott. Alison, I don't know if you're still on, but the two of you, oh, you're there. You can maybe have a conversation about the work that you've been doing with Belgium and Romania, wasn't it?
It was,
yeah. The LEADER project. So maybe you could connect with one another and learn a bit more then. Mads Fisher-Moller, you've got your hand up?
Yeah, so yeah, I don't think anyone here knows me. I'm a fairly new professor in food policy at Scotland Rural College. I'm just here in order to among other things, learn from these kind of discussions, because I will be working on the research program that Artemis just mentioned. So just to say that if you have anything to add, I'll be working specifically on food and local food economies and relating food to tourism and using food tourism as a way to develop rural economies in Scotland. But we are a whole team at Scotland Rural College working on rural economies where tourism is of course a crucial component, and also a lot of our folks at Scotland Rural College are very focused on like community-led initiatives. So I think what you have to offer from this group fits very nicely, and I think there should be, of course, obvious synergies to be explored between your experiences here and the research that we will embark on starting next year. So it's just about creating those links. And as you can hear, I'm not from Scotland, and I have hardly had a chance to visit Scotland at all. I arrived in the middle of pandemic from Denmark, so I've had extensive experience in policy development in Denmark and the Nordic countries. So that's my background.
Lovely, thank you. And Matt, it would be great to have a chat actually, because we also do some work around community food as well. So perhaps you could drop us an email and we could arrange to have a conversation around that, because I think that we could probably.
Yeah, that'll be great. I'll just set my contacts in the chat, and then you're welcome to follow up. All who's in the meeting.
Lovely, perfect. Thank you. Does anybody else have anything to add at all? Because if not, I'm aware that it is Friday afternoon and the sun has appeared here, and I probably feel like that's probably the end of the conversation. Somebody's saying, shall we repeat it quarterly? Absolutely, you can host next time. No, do you know, it's been a really enjoyable session and so lovely to see you all. There's lots of new faces in there that, oh, hello. Lots of new faces that I don't know. So so please, folk, just get in touch with us and stay connected in, because this conversation isn't going away. We're going to continue it. And thank you very, very much for coming along and joining in. And I hope you all have a lovely weekend and the sun shines for everybody. Thank you. Cheerio.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you very much for hosting.